Hey there, my name is Alex. I am the Silver Mont, and this is a review for Monster Hunter Rise and Sunbreak, played on PC via Steam. This is not a sponsored review. I bought Rise and Sunbreak with my own money. After all, Monster Hunter World remains my most played game on Steam, but elsewise I'm still a relative newcomer to the Monster Hunter franchise. Rise launched on Switch last year, but I decided to wait for a PC release as I wasn't too keen on the Switch version. And you can certainly tell it was a Switch game. Compared to World, it is notably less ambitious, and the overall quality of the visuals is considerably lower. Still, I wasn't so much concerned with the graphics as I was with the performance. Whilst the graphics in World are nice, the performance is the real important issue here, and the game targets 30 FPS on Switch. No idea how often it hits it, but I wanted PC for higher frame rates. I picked up and played through Rise shortly before Sunbreak came out, and if we're comparing with World, there are definitely steps forward, but also steps back. Remember how World had the monster tracking mechanic? That has been removed and replaced with effectively gathering SERA birds in your pre-hunt phase. It's not like they perform the same function, but they are the same in that it's something you do before you fight the monster, and during. But perhaps I'm getting ahead of myself. If you have no idea what Monster Hunter is, well, it is a game wherein you hunt monsters, using a variety of weapons. You hunt them, you carve them up, smash them in, and you use the bits to make stronger gear, and repeat. Well, that's about it, but that's all it needs, as Monster Hunter has some of the most involved and well-designed combat around for 3D action games. Of course, it doesn't play anything like Devil May Cry or Ninja Gaiden, because it is almost entirely about fighting one monster at a time. The game is all about boss battles, the monsters. Each monster will have different attacks, tells, mechanics, and ways to fight them, and each monster takes, I don't know, 5, 10, 20 minutes to defeat, depending on how much damage you're doing, how much health it has, and so on. And every weapon has a very involved playstyle that will take you some time just to fully grasp, let alone to master. But going back to the comparisons with the last major game, World and its expansion Iceborne, for the most part, I would say that Rise and Sunbreak iterate on World and Iceborne in good ways. You no longer need to mine 3 times, just hit it once and you're done. Quality of life changes such as that are nice. And the new movement system is pretty cool. You can run up walls, grapple through the air with wire bugs, grappling hooks basically, and traverse the environments smoothly, all in maps that aren't broken up by loading screens as some of the older games pre-World were, on account of being portable primarily. One big new feature is the Palamute dog. Monster Hunter has given us cats to fight alongside with, and now we get dogs. But I'll admit, I never really use them other than for riding around on now and then, because the Palicos are just better. That's also another step back from Iceborne. In that game, we didn't need to bring a specific companion just to ride around the maps. We could hop on little critters after befriending them. So whilst it's nice being able to directly control the dogs, it's a nuisance having to choose between conveniences. As for the SERA birds, that's a very bizarre and, in my opinion, stupid mechanic. Basically, every map will be littered with little birds. Once you draw close to them, they will freak out and inject you with magical juice that makes you stronger. If you want to reach full health and stamina and stats, you'll need to get vaccinated by these critters more than a dozen times. You might argue this is optional, and of course it is, in the same way that increasing your defense is optional or getting a stronger weapon is optional. At the end of the day though, it's not fun to run around for 5 minutes just to pump up your stats when we could have just used food or a max potion to achieve the same result. Of course, that's one of the benefits of being on the PC system. You can find mods that tweak the SERA bird values, meaning instead of needing to pick up 20, you only need to pick up 10, for example, saving you time as you don't need to waste time on a tedious game mechanic. There's also a really cool mod that removes the game's kill cam and instead gives you slow motion on kills, which I'm a big fan of. As for other big changes that Rise brought in, we almost got Hunter Arts back in the form of Wirebug skills. Every weapon has a number of skills they can use, which function on a cooldown. The sword and shield, for example, can use a defensive whirlwind attack, which gives them a bunch of iframes. Or they can do a straight up Shoryugeki uppercut to knock out monsters, and in Sunbreak you're allowed to equip 2 different skill loadouts at once that you can swap between at almost any time in combat, which is really nice. In general, these are nice additions, the skills. I just have a slight issue with them all being wirebug related, which I think limits the creativity behind them. That and there's a definite bias amongst the development team. Just look at what Longsword got in Sunbreak compared to Lance. I'm not even sure if the Lance got a single new animation for Sunbreak. Recycled ones, including what feels like a recycled insect glaive animation, makes up the bulk of them, even if the move itself is a lot of fun. But generally speaking, some weapons get a lot more love than others, which is a shame to me. Give it another generation or two and the longsword will be able to knock out monsters by sheathing their weapon and bonking with the sheath for blunt KO damage. And they'll be able to shoot out laser beams, because it's not fair that longsword has no projectiles like the bow has, right? Yeah, it's not a huge issue at the end of the day, but it is certainly a bit of a frustrating one, depending on which weapons you enjoy. Fortunately, I enjoy a bunch of the weapons, so there'll always be something I can mess around with. Then we have the story. I'm not gonna lie, the story of Base Rise is pretty awful. It's the monsters are going crazy. What is making the monsters go crazy? It's this thing, we smack it. Now, to be fair, the expansion has almost the exact same story, and well, come to think of it, that's like the story of every Monster Hunter pretty much. It's the monsters are doing something. Let's kill monsters to figure out why they're doing this thing. But it's whatever. Sunbreak's story is better, just the way it's told in the presentation and everything. But the almost overwhelmingly Japanese setting of the base game wasn't something I enjoyed. Don't get me wrong, I am fine with games being set in Japan, like Samurai Warriors Kessen Nobunaga's Ambition, Shadows Die Twice, and so on and so forth. There's loads of games set in Japan, but something about Monhan World Japan just felt stupid to me. Perhaps it was the fact that people subsist solely on a diet of dango, or maybe it was just the woman constantly singing, or all the high-pitched children shrieking at me constantly just when I'm trying to take 5 steps across the hub, which I can't do without hearing "hey hoi" or something. Whilst I typically really enjoy the kinda cutesy world of Monster Hunter with the palicos and everything, something about Kimura rubbed me the wrong way. Sunbreak improved upon that too, with a hub that I preferred the look of, and again I could take 5 steps without "hey hoi" being screamed at me. As an expansion, Sunbreak gives us new moves, new armors, new monsters, new mechanics, and a new story. Overall, it feels like a solid expansion. I quite enjoy a lot of the new monsters. Golmagaran, or whatever he's called, the big monkey's really cool. I like fighting him, I like fighting Lunagaran. Compared to, say, Almudron in the base game, who feels like garbage. And, well, he still feels like garbage in Sunbreak, actually. I don't like the new version of him either. Remember when I mentioned how ambitious this is compared to World? Well, yeah. As well as being less ambitious, it also feels less polished. Now, of course, I haven't compared every single hit zone, hitbox in these games. I have no scientific way to do that. All I can go by is how it feels. And there are so many more instances in Rise where I feel like I am hit by something that wasn't remotely near me. Like a tail goes over my character's head by 5 feet and my character goes flying anyway. And it almost feels like they didn't even bother adjusting hitboxes above the monsters. It's more like if you are above a monster when they attack, you just get hit, no matter how far above you are. Unfortunately, it's one of those things which is going to change depending on who you ask, and again, it's not like I can provide technical data on hitboxes. All I can say is how it feels, and it feels like, well, there's some busted hitboxes in Rise on some monsters. More so than in World, I think. But on the flip side, if we compare with World, there are a lot less obnoxious things too, like Kushala Daora. If you poison it, you can remove its obnoxious wind aura, whereas in World, you just had to suffer like a clown. And compared to World, there's a lot less kind of things that stun you. And I don't just mean stun, I mean things like shockwaves, that your character's like, whoa, the ground is moving and I'm stumbling around. World had a lot more of those than Rise, I feel like. So it's a bit of a mixed bag there. Like I said, some steps forward, some steps back. Overall though, I am pleased with the weapons, gameplay and roster of Rise and Sunbreak. One thing that bugged me in World was how 90% of the cast were dragons. This time we have more of a variety, and I'm really enjoying that. Going forward, I hope they continue to tweak these games to focus them on what works and cutting out what doesn't. We don't need spirit birds. And not relying on decoration RNG is nice, but they replaced it with melding talismans, which is another form of RNG. I don't know how many hundreds of talismans I've made trying to get a specific one, but oh well. And this probably sounds like heresy, but honestly, at this point, you can include the tactical sort of gameplay perspective of sharpness and monster hardness whilst removing the tedious aspects of it. It wouldn't be hard to achieve. I know, it probably sounds like I'm crazy for saying this, but what is the goal of the sharpness system? To punish you for hitting the harder parts, so that you need some downtime? To reward you for a measured approach? Maybe, but what does it actually boil down to at the end of the day? Clubbing monsters with early game weapons feels awful because you have like yellow and green sharpness, so you hit them, you bounce off, then you hit them and your weapon's busted. And then at end game, you just run protective polish or something like that and you completely ignore the whole mechanic for the most part. There's got to be a better solution here, and the sharpness just feels like a dinosaur mechanic, no pun intended, left over from Monster Hunter 1 when the game was a lot slower paced. If we went back to that really slow methodical pace, then sure, but Monster Hunter these days is pretty anime with a lot of crazy flying about and stuff, and having to sharpen the weapons just feels out of place there. And in my opinion, just get rid of it. Replace it with a better, like, you know, monster hardness and softness system. Just don't bring back the clutch claw style stuff, unless you're completely reworking it to make it not more or less mandatory. You know what else we need? A properly co-op story. Rise and World have very few cutscenes where all the players show up together in the cutscenes, but it might seem like a small thing, but it really adds a lot to the experience, I think. It's always nice to see all of the hunters in a cutscene. That small change would help a lot. That, and a hunting spear weapon. My friend and I actually came up with a rough outline for how that might work. On that note, you have one long spear as your primary weapon, which you use with both hands. You also have a short spear, like a javelin, that you can throw or impale into the monster, allowing others to strike it for increased damage. So basically you stab it in the monster and it makes like a weak point. It softens that point and then you club it a lot. But anyway, as a sequel to Monster Hunter World, Monster Hunter Rise might disappoint, as it technically isn't a sequel. It's more like a spin-off. Whilst it has plenty of content, it isn't a massive leap forward as a sequel should be. Not like when you go from Monster Hunter 4 to Monster Hunter World. Rise is more like going from Monster Hunter 4 to Monster Hunter Generations, if that makes sense. It's not a mainline entry, but a sort of spin-off or a themed thing. It's a... well, even spin-off isn't really the right word. It's just not a leap forward, it's a sideways thing, which isn't necessarily bad, but if you want this big leap forward, then this doesn't represent that. It's more something for the kind of die-hard fans, you could say, instead of the casual fans. But on that same note, Rise is the first Monster Hunter, I think, in the RE engine, so I'm sure a lot of work went into that. Although I do wonder if they were able to use assets from World, because I'm pretty sure World had to make all of the monsters more or less from scratch with completely new models. Or at least new models. Maybe they could use the old skeletons and rigging data. I don't know. I don't know how game development works, but all I know is I'm very excited to see what happens in Monster Hunter 6 with, you know, RE engine at its like full potential with, like, you know, high-end graphics and everything, big budget. Will we finally get laggy back? So, to sum this all up, For veterans of Monster Hunter, you've probably already played Rise. If you haven't, I'm sure you will enjoy it, and Sunbreak. The expansion adds a lot of nice quality of life features, although I do hope they improve on the layered system. I don't think there's a layered weapon system in Sunbreak, unfortunately. I could be wrong. Maybe you need to hit like Master Rank 99 to unlock it. I don't know. But if it's not there, I hope they add that in an update. If you're new and have never played a Monster Hunter game, Rise is a great place to jump in, although perhaps not quite as good as World for beginners, friendliness, and an introduction to the world, in my opinion. Definitely games worth looking into though, either way, as the gameplay is really solid with a good amount of depth to it, and for the most part is very well balanced too. One nice thing that doesn't exist in Rise as it did in World, MMO style DPS checks, which invalidate certain playstyles, and I hate them. I hate the DPS checks in World. They are obnoxious. And they are a sin in a game all about creating your own hunting style. So never bring those back, Capcom. But thanks so much for watching. Hope this review was useful or entertaining. Catch you next time.